Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned to atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and any of the issues related to those issues. A hearty shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Join the nation by hitting that subscribe button. If you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button, and your membership options for citizenship will be presented to you. Today I want to kind of go on in my Heroes of Faith Bible study for Tuesday Bible studies, and I want to deal with the character of Abel. The writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews 11, has this list of heroes of faith. And Abel's the first one on the list. And what the writer of Hebrews writes about him is, says, by faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. I don't know. When I look at the story of Abel, it's really interesting that Abel is one of those guys that doesn't have any dialogue. He doesn't really talk at all. There's no dialogue in the story of Abel. He's just commended as a hero of faith, so to speak, for his actions. Now, the problem I, of course, now have with that as somebody who thinks faith is not a virtue, I think it's a vice, is how easy it is, and Abel is a good example of this, of how easy it is to be considered a hero of faith for doing something completely mundane, okay? So let's look at the story of Cain and Abel and see, and we want to focus particularly on the actions of Abel himself. It says, now Abel kept flocks. This is Genesis 4, verse 2, okay? And I think we're going to be running basically to verse 8, so not too long. It says, now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the first from the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. So Cain is the one actually taking the initiative in offering up something to God. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but Cain on his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. That's it. Now, what does the writer of Hebrews say about Abel? It says that he offered up a better offering again than Cain, which is in the story, okay, because it basically says, that the Lord looked with favor upon Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. Okay, that's verified by the story. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. Now here's the problem that I have with that part of Hebrews. Where the heck is that in the story? I don't know where he's getting that, other than maybe perhaps there's extra biblical accounts. My reading of the book of Enoch was a long time ago, so maybe there's something in there or some other Jewish literature where there's some sort of conversation where God speaks well of Abel's offering. But if we just take the Genesis 4 account at face value, okay, what we get is just an arbitrary decision by God. God just looks at Abel's offerings as, hey, good job, you're righteous. And Cain's offerings, he doesn't look on with favor. In other words, it's kind of like coming into the throne room of the king. One of them has a barbecue, okay, of animals and fats and all this other stuff. And the other guy has a barbecue of grains and fruits and things like that, because that's, his livelihood. And all of a sudden, man, all God does is get up from his throne and say, hey, man, I like the barbecue, but I don't like the vegan one. Okay, it's like he makes this arbitrary decision to like one and not the other, and then gets upset at Cain for Cain not being, you know, being a little bit downcast about the whole thing. And so it's really weird that the only reason that Abel is considered to have faith is because God looked at his offering with favor. That's the real action here that's interesting, because all Abel does is bring the first of his flock and the fat portions thereof. Maybe there's this idea of, Abel's bringing forth his best and Cain is not. He's just bringing some of. And maybe that's the thing, but and I used to argue that way as a preacher, that maybe that's what the reason was. I had a lot of hypotheticals when I preached this passage because I just never really could understand exactly what the thing was. I thought the writer of Hebrews is like, okay, God speaks well of his offerings, but there's nothing in this story where he does that. Okay, and so is the writer of Hebrews taking a little license with the story and injecting his own theological opinions, possibly. He speaks well of his offerings. Now, from my perspective, all I really see here that Abel did was hold a better barbecue. Okay, he just held a barbecue with, and burned up these offerings and gave them to God. And somehow that earns him, this place in the Hall of Faith, Hall of Fame of Faith, the Heroes of Faith, whatever you want to call it. Somehow Abel gets in for a bare minimum thing. He gathers up the first of his flock, he kills them, puts them on an altar, and burns them up before God until there's nothing left. And somehow that makes him a hero, a Hall of Famer, as far as faith is concerned. When I used to preach I think I did a couple series on the Heroes of Faith when I was a pastor using Hebrews 11, and Abel was always the most challenging because there's so little there. Okay, but I could sit there and say that Abel understood worship or something better, or he understood what it meant to sacrifice, or it's like, you have to make stuff up to make Abel into this big Hall of Famer, this hero, because all he is a shepherd that sacrifices some of his stuff. Okay, and that's it. That's it. And that's where, I look at faith now, and what it teaches to me about faith as an atheist is that what religious people, when they look at faith, and the way I used to as well, is we look at faith as something that makes ordinary things extraordinary. Okay? So Abel offering up a barbecue suddenly becomes an act of faith and puts him in the Hall of Fame of faith because somehow he understood something about worship of God that nobody else did because of his faith. And that's it. Okay? All Abel does in the story is offer up a better barbecue and get killed by his brother for it. That's it. Okay? And it's interesting how faith, even in today's context of today's church, makes a person, this great individual. I know that there's a lot of people in this world that, when they die, people, he's a great person of faith. He never missed a Sunday. And it's like, it's not a great feat to regularly have the habit of going to a certain building, going through a certain ritualistic service, and leaving every week. That doesn't take a great deal of sacrifice or effort on your part. It's not an action where you're helping humanity. It's not an action where you're building up yourself or developing yourself, maybe, I guess. It's not an action that anybody can't do. Okay, it's one thing to be a hero or a Hall of Famer for doing something that nobody else can do. It's interesting that sports Halls of Fame at least have better criteria than this, because they actually expect you to do something extraordinary that nobody else did while they were playing whatever sport it was. Or when you look at various Halls of Fame for music or things like that, somebody got popular, somebody got, sold more records, somebody did something else. In science, it's like this person discovered this person discovered that. But when it comes to faith, you can do the most mundane things. And if people perceive it as done in faith before God, they will exalt it and make it even more than what it is. Okay? Faith is a great way to tell the fish story, and it keeps getting bigger. And that's really, I think, what happens with Abel here. When you look at the Genesis story, which is actually the first thing that's written, the Genesis story doesn't have Abel doing much. He just offers up an offering and gets killed by his brother, okay, and becomes, quote unquote, the first murderer. He becomes the first victim of murder. That's it. It's a tragic story for Abel, but to be honest, I look at these characters, I don't think they actually existed. But when I look at the story as literature, it's like, that's it. And later on, hundreds of years later, the writer of Hebrews sits down and he wants to tell his audience all these great stories about faith. And he decides to start with Abel. And he says, God commended his offerings. And it's like, all he did was look at favor on his offerings. He just happened to like the meat at the barbecue better than the veggies. Okay, and this is one of the real things about God I don't like, because he's very arbitrary and capricious about these things. And, it just makes him kind of a jerk. But, he could have, what God could have done is said, you know what, you both brought me something of your hard work. I look on favor with both of them. But somehow he has to make this decision, and it ends up causing a problem. Okay, because Cain is the kind of guy, he's looking for favor from God, but he's not getting it. Okay, and it's because God makes this arbitrary decision. And so Abel's in the story is kind of just there. Okay, he does one action, offer up a sacrifice, and then he has something happen to him. He gets killed. And somehow that makes him this great Hall of Fame, hero of faith status. In fact, he's the first one we're going to talk about of how great his faith was. And all he really does is hold a barbecue. That's it. And that's what I'm talking about, why faith is not a virtue. It's a vice. It's a deception, because you deceive yourself into thinking, well, that person did something religiously or did it in faith, or they were this dedicated, devoted person that was just ordinary in every other respect, didn't really do anything for humanity, just kind of lived their life and died. And suddenly you exalt them to statuses that they don't deserve, all because of religiosity and all because of this idea of faith. And really, it's kind of really deceptive, okay? Because to me, if I'm looking at Abel, I'm like, well, he didn't really help himself because he ended up dead. He didn't help the people that he loved and cared for, not even his own brother. He could have interceded on his brother's behalf. Well, why don't you accept Cain's offering? He works hard too. He doesn't do that. He's certainly not making humanity a better place, okay? In fact, he's being wasteful, in my opinion. He's burning up, perfectly good meat that could have fed somebody. Instead, he wastes it, burns it before a God who has an arbitrary, capricious decision to decide to accept his offering and not somebody else's. And so it's really kind of one of those weird stories where faith is used by the writer of Hebrews to exalt the actual story in the Bible. And I see this in personal religious life too, where people get built up because they did whatever they did in faith. And I don't know, it just seems like faith allows us to think more of something or certain actions or very mundane things and make them more than what they really are. And that's probably, to me, the auto-deceptive nature of faith, is because then we apply it to ourselves when we're believers. Oh, I did this little thing that doesn't really amount to much, but I did it in faith to God, and so it really is important. God's watching, and he's going to reward me for that. And it's like, no, you did something small that didn't amount to much, and it's because you really didn't put your effort into it, so on and so forth, or you're just living a normal everyday life, and you just don't want to accept that. You want to make it into something more than it is. And this is part of the nature of faith, and it's exampled in Abel. I'd be interested in of course, on Bible studies. I'm always interested in other thoughts about the passage, so be sure to put those into the comments, and I'll address them if I have time, although I'm getting a lot of comments these days. And so thank you very much for stopping by and listening to this little Bible study on Heroes of Faith. I'm going to continue on in the rotation. Tongues of Fire, When God Kills, and Heroes of Faith will just keep rotating like this, but I wanted to give you the first character in Heroes of Faith so you can see what this series is going to be like. But thanks for stopping by. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. As always, live your best life. You only get one go around, so make sure you give yourself to and the things you are care for, your time, talent, and your treasure, all that stuff. Give it to yourself, your family, give it to making us a better world, and don't waste it on the trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. I speak from experience. And as always, live your best life once again. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.